Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. I hope that through this podcast, you will be able to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst. Well, it's only been a couple of days since my last podcast, but I wanted to follow up on what I spoke about last time. So last time I spoke a little bit about walls, and after I did that, I had some people approach me based on that podcast episode. First, I want to thank you for being patient with me, for listening while I worked through some emotions with you and shared a little bit about what I learned through that experience. One of the things that was really helpful is that as people came to me and asked me questions about that episode, they helped me realize where there was a little bit of clarity that I'd like to add. So that's what this podcast is about. This is actually on boundaries, because I did speak about boundaries a little bit last time, but really it's about boundaries and a little bit about walls. It's about both. So that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the questions that I got, or some of the questions that I got, were what is a wall and how do you find them? So a wall is just like how it sounds. It's something that you put up around yourself in order to block out anything that can hurt you. But in addition to blocking out anything that can hurt you, you also block out anything that can help you or make your life better in the process. You're so concerned about your safety that you put up this wall around you and, in multiple directions. Like, you've got a wall in front of you, to your right, to your left, behind you, maybe overhead. You do everything you can to protect yourself because you've been hurt or you see the possibility of being hurt. So a lot of the times, walls get put up subconsciously. We don't even realize that we're doing those things. But here is how you can find those walls. This is how you can locate and recognize that a wall is there. If you remember, I talked about life and how life leaves evidence. Well, walls leave evidence. Our emotions are incredible ways for us to recognize where something is happening in our life. I have a friend that likes to say that emotions are indicators. They are a great big neon sign pointing and saying, look at me, something's going on here. I'm feeling a strong emotion. So the evidence of walls is resistance. If you're trying to accomplish something in your life, you'll feel some resistance to it. You might feel a block where it feels like you just can't connect with something. You might feel numbness. Maybe you don't feel any emotion at all when you should be feeling some emotion. Now, I talked a lot last time about relationships in relationship to walls. But I did mention that walls really are there in all aspects of our life. It can cause blocks in our careers, in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, in our family relationships, with our kids, with our spouse, whatever it may be. A wall really is anything where we're trying to protect ourselves. And I'll give you some examples of some non-relationship walls and also some relationship walls, because I feel like relationships are a really great way to understand connection and interpersonal relationships, because they are so vulnerable and they do have so much emotion involved in them. So they're a really great example that applies in a lot of different areas. In addition to some of those emotions that I just mentioned, sometimes when we have a wall, we will see the existence of that wall, even though we don't feel a specific set of emotions. So some of the signs of a wall being in existence are not being able to accomplish something in our life, whether that's a relationship, not being able to take action on a goal that we have, not being able to get the career that we want, whatever it might be. There's some type of sign, and those signs can be things like self-sabotage. If you find that every time you get into a relationship, you end up doing something that causes the other person not to want to be with you. Maybe some people might do things like get upset at their partner. Some people go really extreme and might cheat or have some type of an emotional affair. Some people can, shut down, push people away. There's a lot of different things that you can do to self-sabotage. You might find that every time you go to accomplish a goal, you find yourself getting distracted, or all of a sudden you start taking action on things that you don't normally take action on. Those kind of things are proof of a possible wall in your life, because all of a sudden you find yourself not able to do the thing that you want to do. Now, there's a lot of other things in that, like fears and whatnot, but a wall, in essence, is a fear, right? Walls and boundaries, in essence, they're the same thing. They're just slightly different. They're both there to keep us safe. And the truth is, walls can actually become boundaries. I'll show you how in just a moment. So, there's an analogy I'm going to use to kind of help you understand the difference between a wall and a boundary. Now, if you have a person, they're trying to keep themselves safe, all of a sudden they throw up walls all around themselves. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want anything to get too close to me. So I'm going to throw up walls in every direction until I'm completely surrounded and nothing can get to me. So if you can imagine a person, they got 4 walls around them. They got a wall up on the roof. They maybe even have a wall on the floor. Nothing can get in. There's no doors. There's no windows. There's nothing that allows anything to get to me. On the other hand, a boundary is that exact same structure, but has a door on it. And that door is locked, but it's got a keypad. And if somebody knows the right combination, they can get inside and come and go as they please. Where with that wall with no doors, nobody can get in. In fact, you might hear somebody say their walls were up. I had to break their walls down. That's literally how you have to get to somebody that doesn't have boundaries. Somebody that has a wall, you almost have to overcome the walls that they have. Have you ever heard somebody say, I am not going to date anybody? And then everybody that makes an attempt to try and go out with them, anybody that tries to get close to them, that person pushes them away. They might even go out on a few dates, but then they find themselves pushing that person away because they have walls up. And have you ever seen somebody like that, and all of a sudden they're in a relationship, and you talk to them and you're like, well, what happened? It's like, well, they just broke down my walls. This person was so attractive and so safe and such great communication and such whatever attributes they possessed that allowed that person to feel safe with them and allowed them to let down their walls enough in order for this person to connect with them and create a relationship with them. Now, that's a wall, but like I said, a boundary has a keypad and a door. So if we want our walls to become boundaries, we have to set a clear set of rules that allow us to connect with somebody. We have to be able to create safety, because that's what it's all about. A wall or a boundary is all about keeping us safe because we feel like there is a threat in our life. And what we can do in order to transform that wall into a boundary is create a set of rules that help us feel safe in that situation. Okay? Now, a wall might have some rules, but they're unclear, they're changing, or there might be no rules whatsoever. But boundaries are very clear and they're set. And they can be changed. So let's say all of a sudden I set this set of boundaries and I say I'm only going to date people in this situation, or I'm only going to have friends that have these attributes, or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden we end up getting hurt. And we realize that our boundaries are not keeping out everybody that needs to be kept out. What we do is then we change those boundaries. Boundaries can be flexible. They should be flexible. We want to continue to modify those until it's like a filter. We want to filter out the things that we don't want and only allow in the things that we do want. And we may find that those filters aren't exactly what we want at first. We start off and we kind of create a set of rules for ourselves, and then eventually we realize those rules aren't sufficient, so we adapt and we change them. The great thing about walls and boundaries is a wall is a clear go away. I don't want you. And a boundary is an invitation. I have a friend, Henry Amar, that likes to say that boundaries are an invitation. They're not saying I don't want you in my life. They're not saying that I don't want to have connection with you. They're saying I want you here. I just need you to meet this set of standards. So you understand the difference between a wall and a boundary is that clear set of rules that create safety and allow somebody access to us, or allow us to access something in life. So I don't want it just to be about relationships. I don't want it just to be about friendships. So I'll give you a real life example. I have had walls up when it comes to heights. I completely turned off any idea of doing anything up high. And then my ex-wife wanted me to go rappelling, so I agreed to go with her. And those walls that I put up, I let them down for her sake. But in order for me to do that, I had to turn them into a boundary. So we went on this 2-day retreat where we learned all about safety and how to rappel. So the first day was all about knots and how to feel safe and things that you should look for. And then the next day was us implementing those. And so at this point, I would be willing to go on a rappel, but I have boundaries. I have to trust the person that's leading it. I have to have somebody that's going to help me inspect the knots, that's going to look at my harness, they have to do a certain set of standards in order for me to feel safe. So walls and boundaries, they apply to things outside of just interpersonal relationships with other people. I'll give you a list of boundaries that I've created in relationships. I have to have trust. I have to feel like there's the ability to resolve conflict. I have to feel like there's open communication, the ability to be vulnerable, the desire for growth, mutual attraction, good conversation. After my divorce, I said, I want to make sure that the person I marry next or have a long-term relationship with next is somebody that I can feel safe connecting with. And so I created this list of things, these traits that I wanted in a person. And there's 4 or 5 of them, like the ones I just named you, that are deal breakers. If I don't trust you, you cannot be my romantic partner. If you aren't willing to try and learn to resolve conflict together, I can't be your person. If we aren't willing to communicate with each other and be vulnerable with each other, that won't work. And so those are boundaries for me that keep me from getting into a relationship that I don't want, as long as I respect the standards that I've created. If I start breaking my rules, start breaking my standards, and decide to be in a relationship with somebody that I'm not attracted to, that doesn't have the ability to resolve conflict and isn't willing to openly communicate, then all of a sudden I'm going to get hurt again. It's my own stinking fault at that point, because I created a boundary and I chose not to hold it. So boundaries are only good for us as long as we understand what they are and we actually respect those things. And the thing is if somebody breaks our boundaries, there needs to be a clear consequence, but there also needs to be a clear way back into it. A good example of this would be my brother. My brother did things while he was alive that I didn't agree with. And one of the things that he did is sometimes he would say stuff that I didn't want in my life, and I wasn't happy with the conversations that we would have. And so I told him no, and he didn't listen. So respectfully, at one point, we decided to part ways with each other. Now, I didn't do a great job of this. I've matured since then. But what I should have done is told him, I want you in my life. And when you're ready to meet this standard and this standard, then I want you back in my life. And please come back. And so it's hard, especially when you're dealing with people that you love, trying to hold boundaries. But there has to be room for forgiveness. And there also has to be room for holding those boundaries correctly. Now, you have to decide whether or not your boundaries have room for forgiveness. I personally believe that people change, people grow. There are so many reasons why we need to be open to forgiveness and allowing people back into our lives. But I recognize there may be situations where you have to finally cut somebody off and say, you can't be part of my life in this way anymore. I understand that there might be a relationship or some type of very egregious pain that's been caused where you just can't allow for that to happen again. The last thing I really want to talk about when it comes to walls is that we can resolve those walls. Like I mentioned earlier, we can transform walls into boundaries by setting a clear set of expectations and a clear set of standards. In addition to that, we have to become aware of their existence, because really boundaries are things that we're aware of. A lot of the times walls are beneath the surface. Like I said, there's a little bit of investigative work that goes into finding your walls. But once you become aware of their existence, you also have to understand their purpose. Why am I creating a wall, consciously or subconsciously? It's there for safety. Why is it there? The only way you can transform a wall into a boundary is as if you're able to create safety with your standards. But if you don't understand why you have a wall in your life, if you don't understand why you're blocking people from connecting with you in a relationship, if you don't understand why you keep having friendships that fall apart, if you don't understand why every time you go to take action on something that you want in your life, a goal that you've made, why you constantly fall apart or self-sabotage or whatever, you aren't going to be able to turn that wall into a boundary because you don't know how to create safety for yourself. Once you understand the purpose of that wall, then you can design standards that create that safety. So for instance, I had this woman that I dated about a year ago, and we both connected with each other, but we only connected to a certain point. We both knew that we were hurting from previous relationships, And that was about what it was. We kept thinking that eventually that pain that we were feeling would just resolve itself. So we had a wall where we weren't letting ourselves get closer to each other than a certain point, but we just thought that those walls would come down naturally. And what we needed to do is we needed to understand what pains we had had in our past relationships, and then what we could do for each other in order to create safety so that we could feel like we could let those walls down. Does that make sense? Once we understood, it's like, well, I got hurt in this way, and you got hurt in this way. What can I do to help you feel safe? What standards can I add into this relationship to feel safe? And then once you understand that, and you've created those standards, then you can move on and you've turned that wall into a boundary. But you have to understand where the wall is, that it exists, and what its purpose is, and then create the standards off of that. The other thing is sometimes we have to have a disconfirming experience. A disconfirming experience is something that counteracts and shows us that we actually can be safe. And that can require a leap of faith sometimes. So, as I mentioned to you on Friday, I just had a relationship that ended. And before her, I had had many relationships where I should have been able to connect with those individuals, but I didn't feel safe and I didn't connect with them. And then with this person, they had certain qualities that allowed me to feel safe. They're somebody that I felt like I could trust. There were things that I saw from her that helped me recognize that she had a good heart. And that made me feel safe taking a leap of faith with her and letting my walls down and letting her in. Now, did I end up getting hurt? Yes. But I was rewarded for that leap of faith because I learned things through that relationship that has helped me. I hopefully gained somebody that I can be friends with for years to come. And even if that doesn't happen, the way that things ended, she was incredibly kind with the way that things ended. So I took a leap of faith because some of my standards were being met with that individual. Some of my boundaries were being met. And then I had to jump and see how things would work out. And even though they didn't work out exactly how I would have liked, they helped me feel safer to go forward with somebody else in my future and trust that things can work out. Trust that I'm capable of creating boundaries that will serve me. Awareness is so important to our ability to transform our life. What I would challenge you to do is to go start looking at your life and see where things are not working out the way you want. Whether that's your career, your relationships, your goals, your friendships, whatever that might be, look and see where you have patterns. If every time you get into a relationship, you find that it doesn't work out for one reason or another, ask yourself, is this because they all weren't the right fit? Or was it because I have a wall that I'm not aware of? And then once you find your walls, I would invite you to understand them, create safety around them, and create a set of standards that can both keep you safe and make you free. I know that you can do it. I believe in you. until next week, remember that you are not alone.